and the name of the book, in fact. Can you? It's a beautifully haunting uh, concept which you will read if you read her opening essay. But I'd really like to hear it in her own words now.
Thank you so much for this, and thank you also to PEN Prithvi for organizing this. It's been about 2.5 years from conception to fruition of this book. And yet, I have to say that when I announced it publicly a few weeks ago, I was flooded with comments about its timeliness. And if there ever was a book that I wished had become less timely with the passage of the months, it was this. But unfortunately, I think we find ourselves in a situation where perhaps today, even more than 2.5 years ago, it is something that I feel our country and our community of writers needs. Um, so I was in the Japanese city of Hiroshima in April 2018. When I woke up one morning to the news of the confinement in a temple, of the gang rape and murder of an 8-year-old girl, Asifa Banu. And, that moment when I read about that crime really left me feeling emptied of hope, emptied of faith. And I think, in some ways, worst of all, perhaps for a writer, kind of emptied and stripped of words. And I was somewhat accustomed by this time, as most of us are, to digesting news of all kinds of atrocities on an almost daily basis. In some ways, to be an Indian is to be inured to these things. Because there were always so many atrocities in competition that one kind of felt that if you couldn't be equally outraged by every brutality, then why anyone? But I think on the day when I read about how Asifa had been sedated and bludgeoned and choked, my usual reaction to an event like this, which was a kind of ephemeral horror, which was almost comforting because one kind of at the same time knew that it would pass. But this was somehow supplanted by a very, very dense weight. And I felt very contaminated by it, very complicit in it as a kind of Indian, being an Indian, and at a loss of how to process it. And I found it very difficult to discuss it in any way, not only with my children, of course, they were very young, but even my husband. And so I ended up spending the day with them without bringing it up at all. Even though everywhere I went, I kind of felt that this little 8-year-old girl in pigtails and a purple dress, Asifa Banu, was accompanying me everywhere we went. I tried to, focus on the present. And as I said, we were in Hiroshima. And so we spent the morning visiting the Peace Park Memorial. And this was a museum that was dedicated to the victims of the 1945 atomic bombing of Hiroshima, that the city has kind of become synonymous with. I learned that estimates of those that had been killed ranged between 60 and 80,000 in the immediate aftermath, and that the heat generated in that explosion had been so intense that many people had simply vanished with the explosion. They had vaporized, evaporated. We saw several exhibits that were really filled with pathos. I remember seeing one called School Trousers, which was a wretchedly tattered pair of trousers that had belonged to a boy, Naoki Mikami, who had been attending morning school assembly at the time that the bomb went off. We stood in front of a piece called White Walls Stained with Black Rain, which the black rain was this radioactive dust and soot mixed with water vapor that had fallen on Hiroshima for hours and hours in the immediate aftermath of the bombing. But then, as we were walking through these very painful exhibits, I came across two very simple, almost childlike paper cranes. And there was something about them that seemed to me to be startlingly defiant. There was great beauty in their gentleness and power in how they seemed to refuse the horror of what had gone down in Hiroshima. But at the same time, they acknowledged it while refusing it. These were, of course, not the very first cranes that I'd seen in the city, because the city was festooned in skeins of these origami paper cranes, and they hung from virtually every facade, in the city, including restaurants and hotels and office blocks. And I knew that school children folded and sent in millions of these cranes to the city every year as a sort of symbol of peace. The origins of this folding, of this literally of an army of paper cranes, lay in the story of a little girl called Sadako Sasaki, who had been about 2 at the time of the bombing. But she survived the bombing. However, 10 years later, she lay very sick with radiation related leukemia in a hospital bed. And while she lay there, she folded paper cranes desperately, because in Japan, there was a legend according to which anyone who folds 1,000 paper cranes has their wishes, their prayers answered. And Sadako Sasaki folded and folded, but eventually her strength gave out and she died. But her cranes in some ways took wing, um, as her friends and other school children stepped in to complete her skein of 1,000 cranes. And they have since emerged as a symbol of apology, of healing, of resistance, of renewal in the face of devastation. And I had a thought at that point of time that, until then I'd been sort of feeling very felled and sort of sucker punched by the news of Asifa Banu, as I mentioned earlier, kind of stripped. But I felt at that time that I would not allow myself to feel like that. And because that in some ways is giving up, and that I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to give up on India. And I wanted to fight. And I was constrained in how I could fight. And I realized that the weapons I did have at my disposal were words and cranes, perhaps. And so when I returned to Tokyo, I lived in Tokyo at the time. I began to post pictures of these paper cranes on social media, and I made a video asking people to fold these as a kind of gesture, as an act of reclamation, as an act of reclamation of plurality. Because to me, as I'm sure to all of you, and I think to most of India, multiplicity of identities is a kind of existential fact. We are multiple in every breath that we breathe. We are cocktails and mongrels of various kinds. Personally, I'm a Delhiite and an English speaker, half a Tamilian, half a UP Valley, a Hindu culturally, an atheist by choice, a Muslim by heritage, and of course, I'm an Indian, which is the identity that really threads all of these fragments and multiplicities together into a tapestry. And there was quite a good response to my appeal, and I ended up getting pictures of paper cranes folded by people all over the world and in many cities in India, from Jakarta, Beijing, Tokyo, California, Mumbai, Hong Kong, Pune, Chennai, Delhi, Nagpur, you name it. And it was at that time that a friend of mine, who is a literary agent and also a crane folder, Jayapriya Vasudevan, suggested that I try and do a book, perhaps using in some way the paper crane. And I thought that it would work very well as a motif of connection, and that those of us who worked and fought with words could, through it in some ways, reach out to each other and form some kind of civic space. And we found quite a receptive publisher in the somewhat serendipitously named Seagull Books, because how could a seagull refuse a crane? And I wrote to friends and acquaintances and total strangers whose work I admired, and asked them if they would be willing to come on board. And this was really a labor of love with no financial recompense in what are tough times financially for everybody. But I was gladdened by the largely positive response. And it took me about a year to sort of corral and collect and edit everyone's contributions. But in the end, I think we ended up with very fine collection of 23 pieces encompassing reportage, stories, poems, polemic, comedy, kind of the kind complex and enriching diversity that I think India demands and deserves. I was aware that most of the pieces were written in English, but we did have contributions from poets who write in Kashmiri, who write in Bengali, who write in Uriya. And I think one of the pleasures of the book is that what connects each piece is the paper crane, and the kind of way trying to follow how the crane sort of mutates from piece to piece and trying to excavate it. Because in some of them, they're like Easter eggs almost hidden from sight. In others, they are up front and center. Sometimes they're a physical object, sometimes they are metaphorical. We have writers who've talked about the act of folding and unfolding of cranes and comparing them, for example, to secrets. So yeah, that's really about how the book came about. And all I can say is that this is very much the sum of its parts, and I'm really pleased to have two of our wonderful contributors joining us here today for the conversation, Veena and Annie.
Absolutely, and in fact, my next question is to Annie, which is, Annie, I absolutely loved the poem that you wrote for this anthology, and I would love to hear more about how you interpreted this prompt, and whether the poem was written to the prompt or it was written prior to it and then adapted for the prompt. Or, and I would also love it if you would read out the poem after you answer.
So, um, the poem, to answer your question first, the poem was written to the prompt. When Pallavi wrote to me, I wasn't sure first what I would write. I, my instinct is to write essays because that's also partly my training, and I thought I might come up with something. But the more I thought about it, the more maybe it was a little bit of what Pallavi said. You feel like you've run out of words, and I found myself struggling to write either a poem or a short story. I tried for almost the entire length of the deadline, and I kept telling Pallavi that I'm still thinking, I don't have anything yet. Um, and then finally, I thought about the motif itself, about what cranes mean to me. I haven't seen. I read up about the exhibit and things, but I hadn't seen cranes in that physical way. I hadn't seen them, and I found that the physical object was not doing much for me by way of inspiration. But then I thought about what cranes symbolize, and it is flight, right? It is flight, and it is migration in a sense, taking off, going somewhere far. And those things I found I could work into something uh, workable. I also I just think just um, the sadness that underpins the cranes and the movement towards cranes was something that I think I was maybe just subconsciously not wanting to get into. So when I focused on the flight aspect of it, I found that the poem sort of came out of that. And yeah, so that's the answer.
And one quick question, which is, especially after reading the poem, I really wanted to ask you this, which is, what what is your idea, or what does plurality, the underlying concept behind the anthology, mean to you?
Um, I think we, and me particularly, but almost everyone in India is plural in one way or another. I mean, we are plural not only because we are an extremely diverse, intensely diverse country, and we grew up with all these things, just you know the words that are just said to us, that unity in diversity. Well, what does that mean, unity in diversity? It means that we are very diverse, and organically so, not just in terms of say racial diversity. The way the West interprets it is more or less racial diversity. When they say diversity, they mean racial diversity. In India, I think we have been so diverse for so long that the racial aspect of it has kind of gotten flattened out. There's been so much intermarrying and intermingling, and you can't look at a person and say, oh, that, which is good for us in many ways. And I think what our anxieties over the last 100 years also come from this flattening out, right? Not being able to point to someone and say, oh, that. And I think this is also feeding into the cycle of hate and violence, because it's a kind of physical and metaphoric and social tearing apart of people and trying to put them in their little boxes so you can look at people easily and label them. uh, in my own upbringing, of course, I mean, I am a product of a mixed marriage, and in every way I was very brought up in very plural ways. There's also the multiplicity that language brings, right? We all speak at least two languages, sometimes three, sometimes four. um, and we always change, right? Every time you move a state, you change a state border in India, there's another new language, another kind of people, another set of stereotypes to kind of inhabit and unpack and all of that. I think that was something I really enjoyed. I still enjoy it, actually. Just um, we always have on Twitter, we have these biryani fights, which I'm not even a biryani fan. I don't know why I get into them, but I get into them all the time. Uh, just because I feel like I must take a side. So I stand up for my side and say,
For the
no, my
biryani.
biryani is the best. Yes. But the thing is that India alone has at least 10 different kinds of biryanis, right? If not 20, who knows? Maybe they're 20. Um, and I think this is just one of those very small and silly ways in which our diversity and our pluralism is kind of out there in public. And I think this was something we used to enjoy, we were brought up to enjoy, and now we've become a little bit suspicious of, which is awfully sad. It's one of the saddest things that has happened, that we have started to become a little suspicious of pluralism.
Absolutely, absolutely. Would you like to read out your poem?
Sure. I now have reading glasses.
Join the gang.
Okay. So this poem is called Before the Flight. Wind may screech into your armpit. There's nowhere much better. It's not as if the rivers care and the fish have nowhere to go. Say then, you have wings, and pity the fish trapped in their silken cage of water. But go you must. Treetops may send caution. Flight is not all. Nest, a bend of limb could be home. Say then, you are at home, in flight and in tree. Say, roots not the thing that bind, but set free. To frost, say, you are welcome, but not in my blood. To salt, say, you are beloved, but not my keeper. When sisters say, we stay, the land holds us in peace, it yields plenty. See? Say, bless you, sisters, watch me dance. Watch the sky yield butter to my sword heart.
क्या बात है?
Wow.
I mean, every reader has their favorite line in a poem, but this idea of to salt say you are beloved but not my keeper really really it really, I really resonated with it a lot.
I
Um,
really liked, if I might interrupt, sorry,
of course.
was the say roots are not the thing that bind but set free.
I really believe that, this thing about heritage and who you are,
Yes.
what's that bind you? That is the one thing which should absolutely set you free to grow.
Yes.
So, which brings me to our next panelist, whose short story absolutely knocked my socks off, which is with its sheer humor, with its sheer social commentary, with its blending of the real and the virtual worlds. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the story? And of course, the story is considerably long, but if possible, would you like to read an extract from it?
Yeah, so I'll start off with sort of trying to tell you how I thought of the story, and the truth is that after I'd written my mother-in-law book, I was quite keen on writing a book about maids in India. But I have a day job, and then I knew that somebody else was already writing such a book. But what that process sort of started in me is to be sort of very vigilant about and very and observe how this sort of very strange dynamic plays out between domestic workers and employers, um, and even as I sort of sensed my own heightened awareness of the very problematic parts of this relationship. This is not to say that I haven't been guilty myself of not always being a fair employer. And so I started sort of observing this around me, and at the same time, a few years before the book deal sort of popped up in my head, or the book idea popped up in my head. My daughter was very young, and I had just moved into Gurgaon, and I'd heard about this Facebook group called Gurgaon Mums that exists, and I had applied to be a member because at the time they gave you like a lot of information on weekend workshops and summer camps and things that were crucial as the parent of a small child to be aware of. And I wasn't accepted in the group for whatever reason. And then strangely, I went for a reading of The Mother-in-Law, and I think one of the administrators of the group was there. And then suddenly I found myself in the group, even though my daughter had grown up a little bit in the interim. And so I sort of watched this group as a sociological experiment, because Gurgaon is a little bubble of its own in this country. And every day I would sort of see these posts about terrible maids. I paid her money, she didn't come to work. I mean, and it seemed bizarre to me that why is an employer-employee relationship so complicated? And I think the essential is that they are in our house, and and our house is not a workplace, and therefore we don't know where we stand, and they don't know where they stand. And the easiest way to say it is to say that my maid is like family, and therefore my instinct then is to think, and therefore you can exploit her because they're like family. So it's it's a very complicated rope, and sort of unraveling these threads of it. Um, it has always been in my mind, and I felt that nothing has really sort of looked at that complexity of the relationship. And when Pallavi reached out and asked me about contributing to the piece, like Annie, my first instinct was to write an essay as well, because I'd never written fiction. I've been trying to write fiction for a couple of years now. But then my mind popped back into this thing that's been in my head for so many years, and I thought that there are so many sort of subtle aspects of this relationship that you cannot actually capture in nonfiction, because they're not important enough to be reported, but they are significant enough to be observed, and therefore I thought this is probably a good way to sort of go back to that itch and scratch it, because in fiction you can throw a light on very subtle things, which in nonfiction, if I were to interview the employer and the employee, the employer might not reveal a lot of these aspects about herself, because obviously it doesn't portray her in a good light, and the employee might often be unaware of these motivations, and hence I thought, okay, perhaps this is something that I should best approach through fiction. So to give you a little brief about the story, it's about a Gurgaon mother and her domestic help. And, it's sort of one of these random things where she posts a picture of her domestic health and sort of looking quite cool, and she uploads it on this mothers group, and she's not sure of what the reaction will be. And when the reaction does come, she's sort of stunned by how positive it is. And it's sort of uh, that sort of social media stardom takes a life of its own, and then it threatens the very sort of existence of this very tenuous relationship, as it is. Um, and and I wasn't sure whether all of this was going to sort of work together in a short piece, but yeah, I'll leave it for the reader to decide whether it has worked or not.
I mean, one thing that is immediately clear after reading the story is that it has so many layers. There are so many layers of various kinds of discrimination, various kinds of differences that are played out in this whole virtual world and this Facebook group.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the essence of it. I mean, there are many unspeakables in the physical relationship between an employer and a domestic health. And obviously, there are many sort of complications in the virtual world and how we present ourselves and how we present people around us. And also, um, also the sort of how easily it is to get carried away with very limited internet fame. And we've all seen histories of people sort of burning bright and then burning fast. So I think this sort of was two very complex, different things coming together in the story.
Which I mean, and I would really encourage the audience to pick up the book and read this story. It's absolutely marvelous. But also I noticed, based on what both Annie and you were saying, which is that you had both used the prompt as a sort of launching pad to write this, to write the poem and the story, as the case may be. So a little bit of technical question, how did writing to how did you find writing? Of course, you're seasoned writers, you've done this before, but how did you find writing to a prompt to be? Was it constraining? Was it liberating? Was it stressful? What do you think, Annie?
Um, well, for me, neither constraining or liberating. I have worked with prompts before, mostly as a form of self-training in the early years of trying to write, trying to become a writer. As part of writing groups, we would meet, we would give each other prompts. At one point, we were also trying to do this NaPoWriMo, uh, which is National Poetry Writing Month. National not for us, for the USA, but we used to follow that. Basically, it comes from the thing of April is the cruelest month. So you wrote a poem a day, uh, 30 poems in April. That was the challenge. So a couple of years I did that. And then I also started to create prompts for other people to do it. And I used to try and follow them myself. So what it does, it just offers you something. It's like uh, it's like a little game, a creative game you're playing with yourself. You set certain boundaries, or you set a limitation of some kind. It could be a thematic prompt, it can also be a structural prompt where you say, okay, today is a sonnet, or it can be, okay, today it's paper cranes, however you want to interpret that. So it is something which is neither liberating nor constraining. It just is its own thing, right? But what it does is that it forces you to focus. You focus on the image then of the crane, whether it is an origami crane or a crane in flight, whatever, however you want it, you focus. And I think that can be, I think, very rewarding, the focus that a prompt brings, because it takes you in directions you haven't planned. Mostly we write from whatever, either a deadline somebody set us, or what other people want to read, but a prompt does something else. It takes you in a different direction. And I think that is something quite worthwhile. For a writer, it can be quite rewarding.
What do you think, Veena? Do you agree? Do you just before you read out an extract from your story, would you like to address this question?
Yeah, I mean, for me, in this particular work, when I was trying to figure out the structure and the message, I focused on the title. The Reclaiming Plurality Amid Hatred was what I was thinking about in terms of what I want to write. And the paper crane motive was easy. I mean, the prompt was easy because it's a physical object. It's a visual object. You can sort of see it. The reader can see it, and also it encompassed in it the activity of actually folding paper. So I found that easy to place in the story. But I did not think of the story with the crane at the center. I thought of the story with the title at the center.
Okay. And which part of the story would you like to read out?
Um, maybe I'll start. Maybe I'll read a little bit from the beginning because I feel it's a little difficult to dip into the story in the middle. So I'll sort of set the relationship between the two protagonists and then leave it at that. So stop me when we are running out of time or whenever you say.
We have plenty of time.
Okay. The story is called The Maid. It all started with the oversized glasses her son had found downstairs, bright blue with an exaggerated cat's eye that ended in golden tips. She had asked him to throw them away, but when Sonia Sarm opened a drawer full of sunglasses the following afternoon, there it was. The servant. She must have put them there. Millie, Millie, idhar aao, she yelled. Millie appeared, a broom in one hand, wiping her forehead with the other. Why have you kept this here? Sonia snapped. Millie stepped forward to see the offending item. It was on the table, Didi, so I thought it was yours, she said. Sonia rolled her eyes. Really? How could Millie ever think she would wear something as garish as this? It's garbage. Rishi picked it up from somewhere. Throw it away, she said. Millie took it and walked away. A minute later, when Sonia followed her into the kitchen, she found her standing there, the glasses on her face, trying to glimpse a reflection on the polished surface of the cupboards. She looked ridiculous, like a dog on a skateboard. Hold it, Sonia said. She came back with her phone, turned Millie to the light, and quickly took a picture. Back in the living room, Sonia labored over the caption. My servant's idea of coolness, she typed. In the ladies' Facebook group that she was a part of, there had lately been some policing of language. She remembered someone being shredded apart in the comments for referring to her servant. So what should she say instead? Maid? She Googled, is maid okay for servant? But the results weren't relevant to her research. This was too much work for the phone. She opened her laptop and after a long search found the offending post on the group that had led to the dissection of the semantics of the word servant. Maid, it seemed, was okay, but not ideal. Household help was more acceptable. But to Sonia, it seemed to lack a spark, more like a term from a government file. Finally, she returned to her phone and uploaded the photo. My home manager, she wrote, expecting a few laughs at the exaggeration of the job title, as well as the glasses Millie was wearing. The likes started pouring in almost immediately. The group had some 6,000 members, so anything less than 100 likes indicated that the post had fallen flat. Sonia watched as the number crawled up. After 10 minutes or so, the first comment rolled in. She looks really cool with them. And then that comment started getting liked. This Sonia hadn't expected. Agree, someone said. I like the way she's not smiling in the picture. It almost looks like Meryl Streep from The Devil Wears Prada. Sonia struggled to figure out what was going on. Were they joking or was all of this serious? She waited an hour. Millie finished her work and left. Another hour later, Rishi came home from school. Later, Millie returned to knead her dough and make chapatis for dinner. And all this while, the likes and the comments grew. They seemed to hail Millie as some kind of a fashion icon. By about 11, when the family had gone to bed, Sonia read through the messages again, carefully passing them for sarcasm. She couldn't find any. She took a deep breath and then finally wrote, When I saw those glasses at the store, I knew they would be perfect for Millie. Even though they were branded and quite expensive, I decided to buy them as a gift for her. We are both thrilled. With a quivering thumb, she pressed the button that said post. The next morning, the post had garnered over 800 likes. Her comment was liked by 357 people. A string of praises called her a marvelous employer, a good person. The hashtag stay blessed appeared more than 100 times. Confusing as all of this was, Sonia was thrilled. For months before this, Sonia had tried all kinds of things to get some traction on the group. First, she had delinked her personal account from it so that she could change her name. It was ridiculous to imagine there was anything glamorous at all about her real name, Sonu Sharma. She considered Sonia Sharma. It would be easy to explain away Sonu as a pet name. The Sharma was a bigger problem, utterly common, as it could be anyone from a milkman to a godman. After casting around for days, she eventually settled on Sarm. When she first began posting in the group, there were some questions about her unusual surname. Long story, she would reply, punctuated with an eye roll emoji, but offered no other explanation. I think I'll stop there.
And of course, it gets funnier but also darker from then on, because of course she begins to portray
Become
herself
a
as,
star.
yeah, and as she as a friend to her domestic help, rather than as a rather than the person she truly is. And then of course the end, no spoilers, but it's something to watch. um, I just wanted to quickly also say that this is a book which has some of the uh, best known writers working, at least in the English language, in India currently. If you just look at the table of contents, after Pallavi Aiyar's essay, which introduces the theme and the concept of the anthology, you have Tishani Doshi, Salil Tripathi, Anjum Hassan, who was going to join us today, but who has had some sort of a medical issue, so she is not able to join in. So we wish her well. And Janice Pariyat, of course, Ranjit Hoskote, Shawan Chaudhary, whose Magic Pants is again very, very satirical, very funny. Um, Gopika Jadeja, Samrat Chaudhary, Veena Venugopal, of course, Annie Zaidi, Swaminathan Iyer, and Gurmeher Kaur, among others. I really wanted to ask Pallavi this question, which is, it's a very comprehensive anthology with a variety of themes, with a variety of genres, but it is also not a particularly fat volume. Was there did you find, what was the process of editing it like, in terms of selection? Did you feel you had did you have to leave stuff out? Was it all through solicitation? Did you accept all that you asked for? What was that process like? Give us an insight into the editing process of a major anthology like this.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting experience for me because I've never worked with other people. I've been remarkably solitary as a worker all my life. It's been me and a computer, a pen and a piece of paper in a room somewhere in the world for the bulk of my career. And so suddenly being in a situation where I have to deal with other human beings was interesting and revealing, as all such interactions are. And it was very interesting because some people would like immediately agree, and they would be extremely prompt. Everything was done according to deadline. There were people who I had to chase doggedly over a year and a half. I'm not sure, but you were not the worst offender. There
No,
were
no, I'm
worse
saying I
offenders.
was good.
No, no, I think the two of you were very good. I can't remember much going wrong over there. I had I did encounter some egos. All of this remains anonymous, but I had one person who refused to be edited at all, and like every single full stop and comma was like argued, and there was a lot of kind of heated give and take. And so I also had to kind of learn to deal with different egos and deal with different styles. On the whole, though, I think people were remarkably creative. I was blown away by the fact that I give them a very vague prompt. I mean, essentially, I was looking at different fault lines. So the idea was that you look at the different kinds of fault lines that exist in a country like India, which are multiple. So, caste, class, religion, region, gender, all of these were out there. And that somehow you bring a paper crane into it. And it was, I think, that's the great pleasure of reading this book, to sort of see writers at the top of their game, and how they do rise to this occasion in different ways. And I was very pleased, as I mentioned in the early, with the diversity of genres that we were able to obtain. I had wanted, and I think it's a bit of a failure, to get more languages in the book and not just English. And so I had reached out to people who write in other languages, and I found that hard. I found that they were less willing for whatever reason. It could be that I don't have a personal equation with them, that perhaps they were nervous or not particularly clear about how they would approach it. So in the end, I was able to get a very young writer who writes in Kashmiri. He's wonderful, Mohammad Muneem, and he has a rock band called Alif. And he's written a poem for us, which we translated from the Kashmiri. And he's actually going to set it to music. So we're going to have a song out of it as well eventually. And I had a poet who writes in Oriya, and I had a poet who writes in Bengali. So, there is that. But I personally would have loved to see a greater diversity of languages represented in it, although personally I'm very happy with the diversity of genres.
Maybe that's something for a follow-up volume, perhaps, because do you feel like reading out Muhammad Muneem's poem?
I'd be happy to do that. And if it's all right with you later, I would also be happy to read a small section I have where I discuss the different pieces in the book, to also give a sense of the other pieces in the book. But let me read out Muneem's poem, which sounds beautiful in the Kashmiri. We had a session about a week ago with Maja House in Amritsar, and he was actually attending that. He happened to be in the audience. And so we asked him to read out the poem, and he read it out in Kashmiri and then translated it sentence by sentence. And it was really quite a lovely experience. Where are we? Page 126. So the poem is called Korkun, which is which way. Ah, I ask the middle, which way? I am drowning to the left and right, which way? The darkness is seeking me on every street. I would grope for the sun, but which way? When my death clock strikes, they will look for me, but I am already lost and don't know which way. I may be no scholar, but with fire I let my blood burn my being. I shrug off their taunts, but which way? The white paper crane asked me, who are you? What is Aleph? I replied, I am the artisan of every thought. Which way?
It does read like a ghazal, doesn't it?
Yeah, he said he'd set it like a ghazal, and he was explaining the different parts of a ghazal and how they are.
The translator's name is also so poetic, Rumuz-e-Bekhudi.
It is, isn't it?
Absolutely.
What does it mean?
I don't know what Rumuz means. Bekhudi means to lose yourself. Somebody who's lost,
Do you think that's a pen name, or do you think that would be a pen name? No, it would be something that you would adopt as an artistic name.
How did you now that we are talking about the list of contributors, and you are going to be reading out that part from your essay, did you know all of course you didn't know all of them beforehand, so how did you actually winnow through this? You must have had a long list, you must have had a short list. How did you winnow through it?
So I don't think I know Veena or Annie personally, although I am very much aware of their work, and we have possibly corresponded in the past. I think with Veena to do with pieces for the business line probably, and Annie I can't remember, but I do think we had emailed each. We were friends on Facebook in any case, which is why how I ended up contacting her. But I would say that 90 or maybe 80% of the people in the book I've never met personally. there's one obvious bit of nepotism in there because my father is there, Swaminathan Iyer. And, you know, he's been writing about issues of pluralism for years and years. And so I thought, you know, he'd be a great person to ask. And I loved his piece. It sounded like one of his columns. He does these columns for the Times of India and the Economic Times, Swanomics. So we had a kind of Swanomics in there as well. But other than that, I had a long list of people whose writing I basically admired. And I reached out to them. I had to, you know, sometimes it took some effort in actually being able to contact them. But on the whole, that was not the problem. A lot of people, not a lot, but a number of people who I did want very much for the book were very supportive, but were unable to contribute, usually to do with prior commitments. And, you know, we ended up having a very long tail, and some of that had to do with COVID. I mean, this book was actually supposed to be published at the beginning of this year rather than towards the end, but for a very long time, publishing schedules were off kilter. So yes, but on the whole, I was able to, I would say, you know, pretty much get my top list. This is certainly not a B list, as you can make out from the wonderful names that we do have.
So would you like to read out? Do you feel like reading out that extract now?
I do. So this is a little bit about the different pieces in the book to give a sense of the diversity that we have. So I'm talking about the 23 different pieces. Saying in some of them, the cranes are like Easter eggs, almost hidden from sight, their meaning in need of excavation. In Prajwal Parajuli's essay, The Tenant, the fault lines of class and region are unpacked through the dynamic between Parajuli's Sikkim-based parents and their Rajasthani migrant tenant Deepak. A mobile of paper cranes dangles from the balcony ceiling of Deepak's rented apartment, an attempt, futile and hopeful, to assert his ownership over the space. In Anjum Hassan's meditation on the possibilities and contradictions of womanhood, love on the Delhi metro, an unnamed narrator riding in the ladies' compartment of the Indian capital's metro muses about her determination to refuse the categories imposed by gender, only to be confounded by the sight of a child playing with a paper crane. Veena Venugopal's story, The Maid, skewers the hypocrisies and inequalities of the servant-mistress relationship with a social media twist. Quote, my son learned to make origami cranes in school. Look at all our attempts. Of course, the best cranes are my maids, Millies. Cranes take center stage in essays written by both Salil Tripathi and Swaminathan Iyer, but not the origami varieties. In The Siberian Crane Doesn't Live Here Anymore and Requiem for the Siberian Crane, the veteran journalists use the early 21st century disappearance of the migratory Siberian crane from North India's plains as a metaphor for the increasing hostility of the Indian landscape to outsiders. Tripathi's essay ends with a vision of hope. Look at the sky. Drops of water are making our faces wet. Rain is falling. Cranes are flying. Iyer's conclusion is more somber. Subverting Rabindranath Tagore, he writes of today's India. It is a place where the mind is full of fear and the head is held discreetly low, where knowledge is too dangerous to be shared freely, where the country has deliberately been broken into fragments by narrow domestic walls of religion, where words come out of the depths of opportunism, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards communalism, where the clear stream of reason has been told to go and take a secular hike into that cesspit of unfreedom. My father, has my country fallen. In Jonathan Gill Harris's memoir, which is one of my favorites, I'm not sure if you read that, Unfolding Secrets, the contents of my mother's Chinese chest, folding becomes a powerful metaphor. I quote, I too am folding here, folding, if not a crane, then a story out of bits of stray paper from the Chinese chest. In the hope of connecting with a larger family I never knew, and in the hope of reconstituting something of what was shattered by war. Harris's essay shifts across time and geography from New Zealand to Warsaw, Central Asia, and Delhi, arguing that the fact of unfolding the pain and secrets we fold away in our lifetimes is necessary to confront the venom of hatred. Several of the other contributors range globally as well, even as they take India as their starting point or their end point. In The Silence of the Crane, Radhika Jha talks about the dangers of silence, referencing incidents both historical and personal, from the Armenian genocide in the Ottoman Empire to her own experiences in modern day Goa. Ranjit Haskote's Traveling in the Zone is a contemplation of photojournalists, quote, reaping the wages of destruction and the arrears of hope across the world and through the decades. He concludes by saying, I picture many hands tearing these images of anguish from magazines and newspapers and folding them into paper cranes. I picture a flight of paper cranes, thousands of them, gliding across lines of control and no-fly zones. Samrat Chaudhary's piece, Aziz from Pakistan, returns the book to Hiroshima, which is a city he travels to with a Pakistani acquaintance who is kind of wrought into a friend by the shared experiences and conversations that take place during the journey. I'm going to end quickly. I realize that we only have a few more minutes, so 2 more minutes. I quote from his piece saying, compassion and kindness are inherently human traits. The children from around the world who send a steady stream of origami cranes, millions of them, with their wishes of peace year after year, are just ordinary kids being kids, says Samrat. But what exactly does peace mean? Is it just the absence of war? Samrat disagrees. Cranes weave in and out of every piece in this collection, but I end the introduction by leaving the last words to 2 poets and 2 lines from each of the poets, and then I'm done. From Teshani Doshi's Why the Brazilian Butt Lift Won't Save Us. We know, don't we, that a forest is being truncheoned as we speak, that a girl in that forest is being truncheoned too, a girl or 100. And from Tabish Khair's Folded Paper, a ghazal, only the smallest gesture and the gentlest act redeem our lives against the falling of the sand. So I just wanted to give a sense, really, of the gamut that the book runs.
Yes. One last question is, where is the book available? Is it available online? Is it available? Some bookstores have opened in India. So is it available in bookstores? Is it available online?
Yeah, I mean, luckily because it is Seagull, it's available globally, first of all. So it's distributed abroad through, I think, the University of Chicago or the University or Yale. I'm not 100% sure, but it is available abroad and through all the kind of usual online channels, Amazon and so on. In India, you can order it directly from the publisher, which I would encourage everyone to do, Seagull Publishers. It is also available on Amazon, and it is distributed here by Pan Macmillan, hopefully in bookstores and more as they open across the country.
Thank you so much to all our panelists for joining us. This session will be recorded, so that people who are unable to catch the live session, they will be able to watch it when we upload it later on YouTube. But thank you so much for joining me, and this has been a wonderful session about a truly landmark anthology. Thank you so much. And just a small note to our audience that we are a fortnightly platform. Please follow us on Instagram. We are also on Twitter, and we have a YouTube channel called PEN Prithvi Webcast, where we upload every session's recording later on, so you can watch it at your leisure. Thank you so much, and I will see you next fortnight. So I'll say bye to my panelists now. Thank you so much for giving me your time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.